If you do not control your dog, you could be in breach of the Dogs Liability for Tax Act 2020 and be liable to pay a fine. Stay tuned for more details.
Hello everyone, welcome to LegalChat JA. I am Kimberley Downer and I am an attorney at law. Now, if you're new here, this channel is geared to assist you in understanding the law and making more legally sound decisions. In this week's video, we are going to be looking at some key requirements for dog owners as they take their dogs into a public space as stipulated under the Dogs Liability for Tax Act 2020. And for short, I'll call it the Dogs Liability Act. Now, as you may be aware, the Act came to pass in 2020 and it has repealed the Dogs Liability for Injuries by Act, which came into effect on the 28th of March, 1877. That's like over 100 years ago. So yes, as you can imagine, for many Jamaicans, the act could not be passed any sooner. And according to the Minister of Justice, the Honorable Delroy Chuck,
too often you drive around communities and you see dogs running up and down the road. You have people who take walks in the morning, who take walks in the evening, are being chased by dogs that are supposed to be contained in the household, in this private space. But these dogs, from they see persons on the road, they jump the fence or go through holes in the fence. And we're saying that when that occurs, the dog owner will be responsible.
As you have been hearing on the news, the Act imposes both a criminal and civil liability on an individual who is found to be in breach of the Act. So, hold up. Let's just look at the main differences between civil liability and criminal liability in a general sense before we go into detail as it concerns the Act. Now, if someone is found to be liable in a civil matter, they may be required to pay money to compensate the injured party. In a civil matter, civilians bring or institute the case in court. However, if someone is found to be criminally liable, then that person may have to pay a fine to the court and or be required to serve a term of imprisonment. In this case, a prosecutor institutes the case in court. So dog owners, you are going to want to pay close attention to this act because you could be found liable both in criminal and civil jurisdiction of the court if it is that you are in breach of the act. But I want you all to understand that as the Honorable Delroy Chuck stated in an interview, this legislation is not meant to punish dog owners, but it is meant to urge them to ensure that their private space is well secured. So you do not want your dog to be rushing out on the road when you open the gate. You want to make sure that at all times your dog is under your control. And in this week's video, to help me in showing you what the Dogs Liability Act requires, we have Dr. Simone Johnally, a veterinarian and a member of the Jamaica Veterinary Medical Association. We also have dog owner Javon and his puppy Rebel. I had so much fun with Rebel, who is such a lovable and playful pup. And by the way, Rebel has his own Instagram page, so follow him at the Honorable Rebel. Now, according to their website, the Jamaica Veterinary Medical Association proudly represents virtually all veterinarians that are registered to practice veterinary medicine in Jamaica. And for many veterinarians like Dr. Johnally, animal welfare is a priority, and it should be a priority for all of us as well. So stay tuned to hear the advice that she gives as you seek to comply with the requirements of the Dogs Liability Act. So if you are a dog owner, you need to pay close attention to Section 4 of the Act And subsection 1 states that the owner of a dog has a duty, that means a responsibility, to ensure that at all times, now it says all times, not sometimes, while the dog is in a public space, and the public space could be on the road or at the park, that 1, the dog is fitted with a restraint, such as a secured leash attached to a collar or a harness. Javon and Dr. Johnally are going to discuss why a harness is preferred over a collar.
So as you can see, he has on a harness. I personally prefer harnesses over collars because I feel like they put too much, the collars put too much pressure on the neck, and he loves to tug or, you know, try and smell everything that's in his environment, and he'll be tugging on his neck. So I chose to just get a harness for him that just kind of spreads the pressure out. And one thing I like about this harness, I got one that also has a strap at the top. That way that will stand. If I'm walking him, I can always use this harness to secure him if I don't have a leash with me. And this will ensure that he's always under my control. Yeah, that's why I went with the harness.
So a harness is a good option. Right now, the Dog Liability for Attacks Act doesn't specify that it must be a harness or a collar that the leash is attached to. However, the harness is better and preferred by most veterinarians. Reason being, it distributes the pressure when you pull back on the leash over a much wider area and over a much more protected area. The dog's chest and barrel, which already has a rib cage protecting your important organs, your heart, your lungs, versus if the leash was attached to a collar where you have very little protection covering your esophagus and trachea. You just have a little bit of skin here, and so tugging on it applies much more pressure over a smaller area, and that can become very painful and hazardous for a dog. That's generally what causes the coughing or choking sound that you will hear when a dog is tugging on a collar that's attached to a leash. In going back to the collar, if the collar is the option that you choose, it would be much better to have a soft collar or a leather collar versus a chain for a collar, which can be more physically harmful if you're choosing a collar over a harness. And of course, your harness or your collar must be attached to a leash. There are many different kinds of leashes. This is a retractable leash. It has 2 buttons that allow you to control the length of the leash, so you can have more control over your dog while you're walking him or her. There are other kinds of leashes, like I said, such as chains or regular leather or cloth leashes. Those are fine. Usually it comes with a handle that you can put around your wrist or around it. You can hold with your hands themselves, and as long as it allows you to have good control over the dog, that's what's important.
2. The dog is fitted with a muzzle that prevents the dog from biting any individual. Now Javon will demonstrate how to put a muzzle on a dog.
Usually in a clinic setting, we ask that the owner puts the muzzle on the dog because they're much more familiar with the owner than they are with us. So Javon is going to demonstrate how to put one on.
I usually like to give him a little treat for good boy. So I usually start by just starting from the top of his mouth. And then closing it like this, and then this muzzle I can easily slide it on. Just slide it on, and then it has some clips at the back. So he's used to put on the muzzle. At the first couple times they'll give you more of a fight because they're just not used to it, but you know, once you put it on, you try and praise them or reward them afterwards and just get them comfortable, you know, wearing it. So also there's a strap at the back that I can tighten, that way it can't be easily slide off his face. There's also a strap here to make sure it can firmly close on the mouth, but that's already set to a good size.
So basic training is very important for responsible dog ownership, as you can see.
And 3, the dog is kept under control. So it's not enough for the dog to be fitted with a restraint, such as a leash attached to a collar or a harness, and have on a muzzle in a public space. But also, the dog must be kept under the control of the dog's owner. So one of the most obvious ways in which you can keep your dog under control is to hold that leash. Now, Javon and Rebel can show you what it means for a dog to be kept under control. As you can see in this video, we can see Javon running with Rebel. Javon has control of the dog as he holds Rebel's leash, which is attached to the harness that Rebel is wearing. Also, we see Rebel is off to a great start as he learns some basic commands. So listen out when Javon tells Rebel to sit.
Sit.
Rebel sits. When Javon says down, Rebel lies down. And when Javon tells Rebel to sit again, Rebel sits. Now, the act doesn't require that you give the dog any basic training or any training at all. But it would sure be great if you could give your dog some training so that when you take that dog out into the public space, you have a greater control of the dog. The act also gives the dog owner the option of putting the dog into a receptacle that allows the movement of the dog to be kept under control and prevents the dog from biting or presenting itself as a menace to any individual. So today we discussed the duties of the dog owner under Section 4, subsection 1 of the Dogs Liability Act. This act was put in place to ensure that dog owners keep their dogs under their control and therefore to lessen the likelihood of civilians being attacked by dogs. And as Dr. Johnally states,
So amending the Dog Liability for Attacks Act was one step closer to more and better animal welfare legislation in Jamaica. So the association looks forward to more interaction with our government on this.
So legal chatters, you know that we have to give special thanks to Dr. Simone Johnally, Javon, and of course Rebel. Thank you all for showing us what it means to become compliant with the Dogs Liability Act.
Also stay tuned for part 2 of this video where we will look at the penalties that are imposed where a person is found to be criminally liable under the act.
Until next time, let's chat legal.